If you notice a massive crack in the foundation of your house, uh, your first instinct is usually to just grab the heavy machinery.
Right, yeah. You bring in the excavators, you pour the concrete, and you just forcefully push the structure back into place.
Exactly. You want a structural fix for a structural problem.
Because it's a very mechanical way of thinking, I mean.
Hmm.
You see a flaw, and you apply overwhelming force to correct it. It's comforting because it feels, decisive.
But what if that house isn't made of concrete and wood? Like, what if the structure you're trying to fix is made entirely of human relationships?
Oh, well, that changes the entire dynamic.
Right. It's made of social dynamics and community trust.
Ah.
Suddenly, bringing in the heavy machinery of state power doesn't just fix the crack. It might actually shatter the entire building.
It absolutely could.
So, welcome to today's deep dive. Today, our mission is to examine a profound and frankly startling question about the American legal system. We're asking, where exactly do the problems of the U.S. Supreme Court actually lie?
And to explore this, we are pulling from some incredibly thought-provoking source material today. We're looking at excerpts from Young Kang's book, The Legal Philosophy of the Common Law.
Specifically, case study 2, right?
Right, case study 2, and we're pairing that with essays by the political philosopher Hannah Arendt.
And as we unpack this, I want to set a very clear expectation for you, our listener. Our sources today touch on, well, the most sensitive, load-bearing walls of American history.
They really do.
We're talking about racial integration in schools and the removal of prayer from classrooms. So I want to be crystal clear, we are putting modern politics completely aside for this deep dive.
Yes, absolutely.
We are not here to debate civil rights or religious freedom in the modern sense. We are taking no political sides. We're here strictly to look at the cold, hard, philosophical machinery behind these court decisions, unpacking the complex ideas about state power that are presented in the text.
Exactly. We are looking at one of the most universally recognized Supreme Court decisions in history, Brown v. Board of Education from 1954, and the Little Rock crisis that followed.
But through a completely unexpected lens.
Right. We are asking what happens when the heavy machinery of the law is used to force a social reality.
So to really grasp the weight of this, we have to look at the original blueprint of the American legal system. It was forged in a very specific environment,
It was. We are talking about a constitutional system built on strong federalism.
meaning a powerful central government coexisting with very independent state governments.
Yeah, and a strict separation of powers. The Founding Fathers established a system where the Supreme Court was envisioned as a rather passive institution.
Like a referee almost.
Precisely. Its job was to be the guardian of individual rights and just an arbiter of concrete disputes among the other branches. It was never designed to initiate massive social revolutions or act as, a sweeping social engineer.
But I mean, 250 years of practice has shown us that the court's role has clearly expanded way beyond that restrained blueprint.
Oh, without a doubt.
And that brings us to the turning point, which is Brown v. Board of Education. In 1954, the Supreme Court rejected the doctrine of separate but equal.
Right. And ordered that black and white students attend the same schools. This decision profoundly reshaped the political and social structure of the entire country.
It really did. And from the perspective of traditional constitutional history, Brown is portrayed strictly as a milestone in advancing equality.
But the philosopher Hannah Arendt, in her essay Reflections on Little Rock, raised an entirely different, incredibly difficult ethical question.
And we should clarify, she wasn't defending segregation here.
No, not at all.
Oh.
She did not deny the existence of racial discrimination, and she certainly did not reject the vital importance of political equality. But she asked this, even when a goal is undeniably just, may the government reshape social relations through coercive power?
Okay, let's unpack this because I'm really struggling with this idea on behalf of anyone listening who might be thinking the same thing.
It's a tough concept to swallow.
Right. If the government doesn't step in to enforce integration, aren't we just leaving oppressed people to suffer while we wait for some kind of organic civic deliberation that, frankly, might never actually happen?
That is the natural reaction.
Yeah, how does Arnott justify that delay? It feels like she's prioritizing abstract philosophy over real human suffering.
And that is exactly why Arnold's essay was so controversial at the time. But her argument rests on the mechanical difference between a legal command and human psychology.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
Well, Arnott argued that a true sense of belonging cannot be produced by a court order. It has to arise from inward recognition and real interaction.
Is Arnott essentially saying that using legal force to create a community is like trying to force two people to be friends at gunpoint.
That is a perfect analogy, actually.
Because you might get them to sit at the same table, but you're creating inward hostility rather than actual belonging.
Exactly. If the state tries to eliminate social differences using only the threat of legal force, the psychological mechanism that takes over isn't reconciliation. It is defensive resentment. Yeah, when distant bureaucrats dictate the private, daily realities of citizens, human nature tends to rebel. And not necessarily out of pure bigotry, but out of a visceral reaction to having their local autonomy stripped away.
So she's warning that suppressing differences through sheer state authority doesn't create a genuine community. It just drives the hostility underground where it ferments.
And Arndt took that fear even further, actually. For her, the ultimate danger was the underlying logic the Brown decision established.
Which was what?
Her fear was this: once a goal is officially deemed just by the courts, does government power thereby gain unlimited legitimacy to expand into every corner of life?
Oh, I see.
Right, if this logic is accepted, then any future political ideal could become a justification for governmental overreach.
So power would cease to be limited by the Constitution and would instead become a blunt instrument.
Exactly. A blunt instrument for constructing whatever the current vision of an ideal society happens to be.
To understand why Arndt thought forced integration specifically at the school level was such a massive overreach, we really have to look at how she categorized human existence.
This is crucial. She insisted that human life is divided into 3 distinct spheres.
Right, and for a society to remain free, those spheres must be kept separate.
Exactly. First, we have the political sphere. This is the space of equal participation and equal rights for all citizens.
So like voting.
Voting, public transportation, access to public buildings, these all belong to the category of political equality. Within this sphere, Arndt was clear: any exclusion based on race or origin must be absolutely prohibited. The law reigns supreme here.
Okay, that makes sense. But then Arndt identifies the social sphere. This is the space of difference in identity.
Right, and the social sphere does not operate according to absolute equality. It is grounded in the division of labor, personal affinities, and identity.
So like country clubs or professional associations.
Exactly. People form different communities based on their profession, their class, or their cultural background. Arndt stresses that this differentiation is a natural structure of social life.
So the state has no business forcing everyone into the exact same social clubs or professional circles.
Right. And the third is the private sphere, which is the space of intimacy and exclusion.
This is where people choose their friends and partners based on personal affection.
Yes, and in the private sphere, Arndt argues that exclusiveness is not an injustice at all. Choosing who you invite into your home is a fundamental part of human freedom.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because wait a minute, where exactly does a school fit into these 3 spheres?
That is the million-dollar question.
Think about it for a second. It seems like a massive collision of all 3. I mean, a public school is state-funded, so that feels political.
Yeah.
But it's also a community hub where local groups and identities form, so that's social.
Yeah.
And crucially, it's where children grow, form personal relationships, and develop their minds, which makes it deeply private. Isn't that why Brown was so complicated?
That collision is the exact core of Arndt's entire argument. From her perspective, the crisis at Little Rock wasn't just about racial equality.
What was it about then?
It was about the government forcibly transferring a massive political battle into the social and private spheres. Schools are social institutions and private spaces for children's growth.
So by mandating integration there,
The state essentially dragged a bitter political war right into the daily private lives of kids.
which leads us to the unintended casualties of this blurred boundary. When the government used coercive legal means to promote racial mixing in schools, it forced children to bear the brunt of severe societal conflicts.
Conflicts that the adults hadn't even been able to resolve. Arndt stressed that education belongs first and foremost to the family sphere. Parents have the right and the duty to provide children with a relatively stable environment where they can gradually become citizens. Children lack political judgment.
So if the state turns education into the front line of a political struggle, it forces immature members of society prematurely into deep, unresolved adult conflicts.
Exactly. It weakened the educational authority of families and local communities, bringing raw political struggle directly into the life world of minors.
And it wasn't just the family structure that was weakened. I mean, it was the institutional structure of the country itself.
Oh, drastically.
During the Little Rock crisis, the federal government deployed actual military troops to enforce school integration orders. That is the heavy machinery we talked about in the foundation metaphor.
And Arndt issued a profound warning about this kind of power structure. She
Uh-huh.
pointed out a crucial institutional reality. Power does not become stronger simply by becoming more centralized.
Right. Truly stable power arises from the willing support of multiple levels of society.
Yes. When the federal government uses military force against a local community to enforce a court order, it symbolizes a totally top-down model of order building.
Let me try an analogy here to make this systemic issue a bit more relatable for you. Think of a massive corporation. If the CEO completely bypasses middle management and marches down to the factory floor,
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
right, and they physically force the assembly line workers to collaborate in a new way, using threats of termination, what happens?
It's chaos.
Exactly. That top-down coercive power might get the widgets made that specific day, but it completely destroys local trust. The middle managers feel powerless, the workers feel resentful, and the whole structure of the company becomes incredibly brittle.
The CEO hasn't built teamwork, they've just proven they have the power to punish.
Exactly.
And that brittleness is what Arndt saw happening to American political authority. Using the military might achieve the policy goal in the short term, but it weakens the local community's identification with the national order.
It proves the government has force, but it sacrifices genuine authority.
When law attempts to reshape social emotions through compulsory integration, it doesn't heal the divide. It often solidifies the hostility into something much harder to break.
So according to our source material, this use of the Supreme Court as a blunt instrument isn't an isolated incident.
No, it's really not.
The author, Young Kang, compares the Brown decision to another major shift, Case Study 1 from the text, which focuses on the school prayer cases.
Yes, the text outlines two distinct forms of judicial activism that share striking structural similarities. Even though they seem to be about entirely different subjects, religion versus race.
Right, but the Supreme Court's mechanical approach was fundamentally the same. And just like Brown, the school prayer cases took place in the public schools.
Because education is the bridge between private life and the political community. That makes it the ultimate target for social engineering.
Let's really dig into this first case study, because it's vital for understanding the full picture. In the early 1960s, the Supreme Court ruled that state-sponsored prayer in public schools violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment.
On the surface, the stated goal was neutrality. The court wanted to prevent religious coercion and protect the rights of minority religions or non-believers.
Which again sounds like a legitimate purpose.
Very legitimate. But to understand the sheer scale of what the court did, you have to look at what it actually meant for the daily life of an American community at the time.
They didn't just interpret a law.
No, they actively removed Christian symbols and historical rituals that had been deeply embedded in the rhythm of public education for centuries.
It was a massive reshaping of the spiritual structure of American public education. But let's ground that phrase. What does reshaping a spiritual structure actually mean for you or me?
Good question.
It means that a deeply ingrained local routine, something communities had built their shared mornings around, was suddenly declared illegal by a panel of judges hundreds of miles away.
And this is where the philosopher Eric Voegelin provides an essential piece of the puzzle. Voegelin describes this development as the modern state attempting to purify public space through institutional design.
Okay, what does purifying public space actually look like mechanically? It sounds like someone trying to sanitize a hospital room.
That is a very apt comparison. Voegelin argued that the modern state often tries to act like an architect building a sterile clean room.
Okay.
Instead of allowing the public square to be a messy, organic reflection of the people who actually live there with all their historical, religious, and cultural quirks, the state decides the public square must be completely sanitized.
It must fit a pristine, theoretically neutral ideal.
Exactly. To achieve that purification, the state uses the courts to scrub away any local traditions that don't fit the new secular blueprint.
And both of these massive interventions, removing local prayer and forcing local integration, started with what were widely regarded as legitimate purposes.
Right, preventing religious coercion and eliminating racial inequality.
But precisely because the goals were seen as morally justified, the boundaries of judicial authority were allowed to expand outward with incredible boldness.
Which brings us to another major philosopher highlighted in the text, Leo Strauss. Strauss viewed these Supreme Court shifts as the massive expansion of rights-based discourse.
Let's break down rights-based discourse so we aren't just using academic jargon. How does framing an issue this way change the mechanics of how a society functions?
Well, think about how a normal town hall meeting works. If a community is arguing over a policy, say, zoning laws or budget cuts, people debate, they horse trade, and eventually they compromise.
Right, that is civic deliberation.
But Strauss points out that when you frame your preference not as a policy but as a fundamental constitutional right, the mechanics change entirely. You cannot compromise on a fundamental right.
Oh, wow. It turns a negotiation into an absolute mandate.
Exactly. It shuts down the town hall and moves the decision to a courtroom, where a judge declares a winner and a loser.
And that is the true danger Strauss identified. By transforming complex, deeply sensitive cultural issues into absolute rights, the Supreme Court took them completely out of the hands of local communities.
Deeply complex religious and racial questions were constitutionalized and nationalized. They were turned into enduring, inflexible focal points of political conflict at the highest levels of government.
So what does this all mean? Let's bring these pieces together.
Okay.
If case one was the court trying to redesign the order of the soul by legally sanitizing religion out of public schools,
Right.
and case two, Brown v. Board, was the court trying to redesign the social order by legally enforcing integration. Has the Supreme Court essentially become a team of social engineers rather than judges? Are they rewriting the base code of society instead of just interpreting the rules of the game?
That is the ultimate conclusion the text drives toward. The danger of judicial activism, according to Young King's analysis and Arndt's philosophy, lies in turning the law into a tool of social engineering.
Because when the judiciary stops interpreting the Constitution and starts actively participating in constructing the nation's spiritual and social order, it shatters the constitutional balance.
A balance that was originally grounded in restraint, yes. It bypasses the messy, slow, but necessary work of civic deliberation.
Yeah.
When judicial decisions become the starting point of social reform, political controversies are relocated. They are transformed from questions that should be resolved gradually through public deliberation into rigid commands enforced by absolute authority.
You lose the slow building of consensus and you replace it with compliance born of fear.
Exactly.
Which brings us entirely back to you, the listener. You might be wondering, why does a philosophical analysis of court cases from the 1950s and 60s matter to you today?
It matters immensely.
Because this historical deep dive provides a profound, clarifying lens for understanding the intense, paralyzing ideological divisions we see in American politics right now. It explains why every Supreme Court nomination feels like an existential crisis.
It reveals how relying on heavy-handed authority to force societal change, even for the most justified righteous causes, can actually deepen the fractures it intends to heal.
Right. When you take deeply personal social issues out of the public square and turn them into a winner-take-all legal war, you ensure that half the country will always feel like they're being conquered by their own government.
It is a vital reminder that the structural integrity of a society relies on the strength of its local communities. And frankly, the unglamorous, frustrating work of talking to your neighbors.
Yeah. Arndt makes an incredibly compelling case that complex social issues must be gradually resolved through civic deliberation rather than forced by a top-down mandate.
Because if the foundation is cracking and the heavy machinery of the state is too dangerous to use, the only thing left to hold the house together is the strength of the community itself.
But I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to chew on as we wrap up today. Arndt champions the public square and the slow work of civic deliberation, but look around at the modern world.
Right, it's very different now.
What happens when the public sphere is so completely paralyzed by polarization and digital echo chambers that civic deliberation is practically impossible?
That is the real modern dilemma.
If the courts step back to avoid being social engineers, and the people themselves are completely gridlocked, totally incapable of compromise, where does a society turn to fix its deepest injustices? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the philosophy of law, power, and the complex architecture of human society. Until next time, keep questioning the foundation.